So I was looking at the map of Nigeria the other day, and I noticed something. There are two rail lines running through this country, one on the west, one on the east. And I started following them. Both built by the British, same era, same purpose, move resources out of Nigeria, get them to the coast, ship them to Britain. The western line was built to move peanuts and cotton from the north down to Lagos. The eastern line was built to move coal from Enugu down to Port Harcourt. Same colonial logic, narrow gauge track, same blueprint. But then something happened after independence. One of them started changing. The Western Corridor started getting attention. New investment, new track, standard gauge running at up to 250 kilometers per hour. Modern trains running today. And the eastern one, still same track, the British laid in 1913. Same width, same colonial design. Over 100 years later, when the government finally decided to rebuild it for $3.2 billion, they kept it narrow gauge. And even that reconstruction stops right here at Aba. Everything beyond Umuahia, Enugu, and the rest of the southeast just left. And I thought, how is this possible? Same country, same government, same colonial origin. One moving forward, and the other left behind. This is the story of what happened to Nigerian Eastern Rail Corridor, and how we can change that. If you understand what is really happening here, you have to go back to the beginning. Because these two rail lines did not appear by accident. They were designed deliberately for a specific purpose. In 1898, the British started building the first major rail line in Nigeria, starting from Lagos, pushing northeast all the way to Kano. Why Kano? Because the north was sitting on something the British wanted badly: peanuts, cotton, agricultural commodities that the British industries needed to keep running. The Western Rail Line was also a major conveyor belt, northern resources down to Lagos, out to Britain. That was its entire purpose. Then in 1913, a second line sailed from Port Harcourt, pushing north through the southeast. Why? Because the British had just discovered coal in Enugu, and they needed to move it to Port Harcourt as fast as possible. The Eastern Rail Line was also a conveyor belt. Enugu coal, Justin, Middle Belt resources, all flowing south to Port Harcourt, all shipping out to Britain. Two lines, two extraction machines, neither one built to develop Nigeria, neither one built for the Nigerian people, both built to serve the British industry. And here's the thing about colonial infrastructure. It is designed to flow in one direction, out. Resources out, wealth out, never in, never towards building the places those resources came from. Then the British left, but the railway stayed. And here is where the story of the two lines began to diverge. After independence, both lines ran, but the eastern lines was never given the investment it needed. By the 1980s, it was deteriorating badly. By 1985, it was largely unserviceable. And for over 2 decades, Enugu, the administrative capital of the southeast, had no functioning railway connection. Meanwhile, starting from 2016, the Western Line began its transformation. First was the Abuja to Kaduna standard gauge rail, completed in 2016, Lagos to Ibadan standard gauge rail in 2021. Full Lagos to Kano contracts standard gauge rail, which is now ongoing. And the Eastern reconstruction, when it finally came, kept the same narrow gauge the British had laid a century earlier. $3.2 billion and marked same colonial weight. And I want to make one thing clear, because some people might say, it's just a railway. Does it really matter that much? And the answer is yes, more than almost anything. Think about how the United States built its industrial economy in the 19th century. They laid the railway lines first, and the factories grew up alongside them, not the other way around. Rail came first, industry followed. Germany, the same story. The Ruhr Valley, one of the most powerful industrial regions in the history of the world, was built on top of a railway network. China, the way they moved from a developing country to the manufacturing capital of the world in just a few decades. Standard gauge freight rail connecting factories directly to ports. Rail moves goods cheaper than road by a significant margin. Every kilometer on a truck costs more than a kilometer on a train. For a manufacturer, that difference in logistics cost is the difference between being competitive globally and being priced out of the export market. So when I say the Eastern Rail Line matters, I mean it matters for everything. For manufacturing, for trade, for whatever the Southeast can ever compete at the level it should be competing. And let me just put the numbers on the table. Western Corridor, $9 billion and counting, standard gauge, modern speed, running today. And the Eastern Corridor, $3.2 billion, still narrow gauge. Of the entire 1,443-kilometer line, only 62 kilometers operational. And the government's explanation for why it stayed narrow gauge, too expensive. It claimed the standard gauge would cost $11 to $14 billion, a fund they could not secure. But they found $9 billion for the Western standard gauge. So the money exists, the priority did not. Now here's where it gets really important, because the railway situation is not just about trains. It's about what the absence of a proper railway forces the Southeast economy to do. Right now, most goods moving in and out of the Southeast travel west to Lagos, because that's where the modern infrastructure is. The standard gauge rail, the deep sea port, the logistics networks. And here's a number from the Nigerian Inland Waterways Authority. 65% of container imports arriving at the Lagos port are going to the Southeast. More than half of Lagos port's traffic is Southeast bound. Every single one of them, containers, is being trucked across hundreds of kilometers after landing at Lagos. That is not efficiency. That is structural dependency. And a slow colonial era railway connecting the Southeast to the rest of the country does not fix that dependency. It just makes it permanent. But here's what most people miss when they talk about this railway. They think about it as a Nigerian problem. It's actually bigger than that. Look at the countries bordering the eastern half of Nigeria: Niger, Chad, Cameroon, landlocked countries or countries with limited port access that need to move goods to and fro from the Atlantic Ocean. Right now, a significant amount of their trade moves through Lagos because that's where the infrastructure is. But a standard gauge Eastern Corridor running from Maiduguri in the northeast all the way south to Port Harcourt creates a direct, faster, cheaper route for the entire eastern sub-region of West Africa. This line stops being just a Nigerian railway, it becomes a regional trade corridor. And regional trade corridors attract serious investments from the African Development Bank, from international logistic companies, from governments of neighboring countries who benefit directly from the route. The potential of this corridor goes far beyond what most people are currently talking about. Now here is the argument I want to make that I did not hear enough people making. This railway, a standard gauge Eastern Corridor, is not a charity project. It's not a handout. It's one of the best investment opportunities sitting in Nigeria right now. And here's why. The traffic is already there. We just established that 65% of Lagos port imports are going to the Southeast anyway. The traffic does not need to be created. It just needs to be redirected on a better route. A rail with this level of guaranteed traffic generates serious freight revenue. Add passenger revenue on top, add regional cross-border trade. This line pays for itself. Over time, the return on the investments are real, significant, sustainable. But now the federal government has not shown the political will to make this happen. We have established that clearly. In fact, if anything, it rather has shown the commitment to perpetuate this imbalance. The recently proposed coastal rail corridor with branch extension from Benin to Asaba to Onitsha and the rest of the Southeast can't appear better than a plan to control and tie the region's rail freight traffic to Lagos, because it's planned to be a standard gauge rail. Whereas Port Harcourt to Enugu, which is closer, is a narrow gauge line with no plans to change that, virtually eliminating Port Harcourt's maritime potential, especially against Lagos. But this does not mean it cannot happen. It means the opportunity is open for someone else. So what did the private consortium got licensed to construct and operate this railway? It is not a new idea. It's how railways were built across Europe and America in the 19th century. Private companies licensed by governments building infrastructure, taking the returns. A private consortium bringing together Southeast businesses, Igbo diaspora investors, Nigerian institutional capital, and international logistic partners, licensed by the federal and state governments to build and operate a standard gauge Eastern Corridor. They build it, they run it, they take the revenue. And over time, they create the infrastructure the Southeast has been waiting for. It's a win for the investors, who get returns of a proven traffic corridor. It's a win for the Southeast, which finally gets the infrastructure it deserves. It's a win for the federal government, which gets major infrastructure built without spending the money it said it did not have. And it's a win for the region, for Niger, Chad, Cameroon, who get a faster, cheaper route to the Atlantic Ocean. Everybody wins. And the Southeast is not just sitting around waiting for all this to happen. Enugu State is already moving. The state government has commissioned and completed feasibility studies for interstate rail corridors connecting Enugu to key commercial hubs to the southeast. They are advancing, plans in motion, studies done, implementation being pursued. And this is important because of something simple. If Enugu builds a working intrastate rail line connected to the further eastern corridor, which connects south to Port Harcourt, it has the beginning of an eastern rail system that works, regardless of what Abuja decides to do about the narrow gauge question. You start where you control, you build what you can, and you connect upwards. So come back to this map. This is where we started. 2 lines, same country, same colonial extraction purpose, one reimagined, one left behind. But here's what this map could look like. A standard gauge eastern corridor connecting southeast manufacturers to the north agricultural belt, opening a regional route for West Africa's landlocked countries, creating returns for the investors who are bold enough to build it, not dependent on Lagos, not waiting for Abuja, built by the people who understand what it's worth. So the eastern half of Nigeria was given a colonial railway, and told that was enough. It was not enough. And the southeast knows this. If this video made you to think, share, comment, stay in the series, because the eastern corridor is not waiting for permission, it is building itself.